Okay, hello everybody. This is Here Comes the Spider-Cast, number 7, covering January 1981. And I got to tell you, Josh, I'm kind of having a feeling of deja vu, like I've done this before. Like, do you have that feeling as well?
You know, I was just about to say the exact same thing.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So should we let our listeners in on why we both have a sense of deja vu?
Yeah, so unfortunately I lost my audio from our first record of this episode. So unfortunately we've got to redo the entire thing. But
No
the
problem.
good news is I think we're going to be experts on January of 1981.
Yes.
At least we
year.
should be if we're doing this
Yeah,
twice.
and we should also point out to people, much to the chagrin of another co-host of mine, Mike Dell, we record our audio separately. We talk to each other over Skype, but I record my audio on a Zoom audio recorder, and you record yours on what? Just the computer?
Yeah, I have a mic set up to my computer.
Okay. So, and then basically, here's a little tech secret for everyone. I basically take the audio, sync it up, and so ideally it sounds perfect, both audios sounds perfect on both ends instead of one of us coming through a phone or anything like that.
Right, and especially since like recording over the internet, sometimes the internet will cut out or it'll lag a little bit or there'll be some feedback or something. Having the two separate audio tracks allows us to clean up the audio a little bit easier.
Right.
But again, it also comes with its cons as well.
Right.
If one person loses the audio, then the whole episode is pretty much gone because the only audio we had left was Mike talking to himself.
Which I could have posted, but
yeah,
I thought better of it.
Yeah, you guys could have filled in the blanks, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so do you want to start us off then? Amazing Spider-Man 212.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing January 1981. We're going to be starting off with Amazing Spider-Man 212. Then we're going to move on to Marvel Team Up 101. And then we're going to finish off with Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 50.
Yep.
So with the Amazing Spider-Man 212, we pick up where we left off in issue 49. Issue 211.
211, yep.
And we catch up with Spider-Man helping Deb's uncle out on the boat, and we get the origin story and the first appearance of Hydro Man.
Right, which is really cool because I had always thought growing up that Hydro Man was a classic Marvel Spider-Man villain just because his superpower is so basic. Like, you figure you have Sandman, you have, I don't know who else you have, but basically it's a simple power of water, a guy made out of water. So I was really shocked to learn that this guy came along so far along in Spider-Man's history.
Yeah, and if you look up like Spider-Man's rogue gallery, a lot of the times he's up there with the rest of them.
Sure, yeah.
Like he'll be in the lineup with the rest of them. I mean, I guess Venom is even younger than Hydro Man, but I guess it's kind of well known that Venom is a little bit newer, but yeah, Hydro Man seems way more classic and
older. More primal, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So this issue is written by Denny O'Neil again.
Yep.
And it's drawn by John Romita Jr., whom we all love, right?
Yeah,
another Some people hate. We
classic.
Love him.
I really like him. I think especially now that I'm going back and reading a lot of these, it's like falling in love with his art all over again. Yep.
And I think, a lot of times, like for me, I mean, when I was a kid, I was probably more attracted to the flashiness of Todd McFarlane or Eric Larson or someone like that. And they're both good. I do like them. But John Romita, wow. Like just looking, like this is his early style. It's nothing like he draws now, but it's so straightforward. His storytelling is flawless. And with the inks of Jim Mooney, it just gives it that classic Spider-Man feel. And I also want to point out that there's only maybe 5. There's only a handful of artists that are working today who I will buy any comic they do, okay? I'll just list them quickly. Frank Quitely is one. Chris Sprouse is another. Brian Hitch is one. Maybe Ivan Rice. Are you familiar with Ivan Rice?
No, I don't think so, actually.
He's like an excellent art. He's like a modern day he's like Brian Hitch or Neil Adams. He's just one of those guys.
What does he do? Like what is he most known for?
Well, he did the Aquaman New 52 reboot.
Okay.
And then he did Cyborg, and now he's doing Superman with Brian Bendis.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah, so he's just like a classic, superhero type artist. And anyway, and then the fifth one on that list is John Romita Jr. And so this week, I just picked up Batman number 81 simply because he drew it. And unfortunately, it wasn't very good. Written by Tom King, who I really like, but that issue was terrible. And so I do enjoy the art on that issue, but the story was bad, so I kind of regret it. But whatever. I still love John Romita Jr. So anyway, back to this issue. So so this is kind of interesting because the origin of Hydro Man comes out of the previous story, right? So
right, yeah, it's definitely connected to the previous issue,
which is kind of unique because usually with a superhero origin story, you'd kind of just have like a done in one or whatever. But this, if you just read the issue before, when you get to the end of 211, you kind of feel like, okay, well, the story's over. But it's kind of one of those ones where it didn't have to continue, but it did, and they managed to use it to set up Hydro Man, which I thought was cool.
Right. They kind of like they use the ending of the other one to start a new story. So it's not necessarily that it's connected, but it's a nice jumping off point that we don't have to reintroduce the fact that Spidey's on a boat in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
So I think that was really clever and well thought out that they kind of plan these back to back so they can introduce this new villain without kind of any hitches or bumps or anything.
Right. And there's some cool, so this guy, Hydro Man, his power is that he can basically turn into water. Now there's some cool things that come out of this. One of the things I liked is the way that they introduced him reminds me of the way that a TV show would introduce a villain nowadays. Probably starting in the late 80s or 90s. So I'll give Denny O'Neil credit for that. Denny O'Neil is known for being a more realistic writer. Instead of just sort of having the guy get his powers and then magically knows exactly how to use them and he goes out and starts robbing banks, he has to he doesn't even realize that there's something different about him. So he just looks like he's sweating profusely throughout the story. A woman comes in at a bar and is sort of commenting on that. And then at the end of the scene, he just turns into a puddle and then sort of disappears, right? And then in the next page, he sort of materializes almost like Terminator 2 coming up out of the water. And that's when he realizes that he's got these powers. And so then he goes out to find Spider-Man to get revenge, right?
Right. And I really like that they kind of do a little bit of a slow introduction. And I think that, again, rolling off the previous issue and not having to have like a backstory or like a setup for Spider-Man while he's there, they can just kind of jump right into this character and focus on what's going on with him and show him kind of learning how to use his abilities. It kind of reminds me of Spider-Man, how he, when he gets his powers, he has no idea how to use them. He's got to learn and practice, and we kind of get a little bit of that with Hydro Man. At least a hint of it. It's not just kind of pushing you right into the villain. But I will say, as much as I do love it, there is some like fun goofiness to it with him kind of searching for Spider-Man by popping up into every single drain in New York until he finds him.
Ridiculous. Yes.
Yeah. It's goofy, but I love it.
Yeah, I love it too. I can forgive it. Like a guy's watering his lawn. He comes up out of like the puddle. A woman's doing laundry. Another guy a janitor is mopping a floor and he comes out of the bucket, which makes no sense.
Yeah, so the janitor must have had to like fill it up at the tap, and he went into the bucket from the tap and then waited for the right moment to jump out after he's already been mopping the floor.
Right.
Like, it's just goofy.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it makes me just realize this would make a great villain in like one of the movies, eh? Like imagine what they could do with the CGI, just coming out of the water. It'd be great.
I mean, you kind of got a little bit of that with Far From Home. But it ended
elementals
up being,
or whatever.
It ended up being like a spoiler alert if you haven't seen Far From Home yet, but it ended up being like a Mysterio mirage.
Sure.
So, but I guess you kind of, you got a little bit of that, but I would like to see this actual character kind of show up again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. For sure. And so, and another thing is, we were talking about Romita. I love Romita. But the one thing about the art is that it's very, like this art in this issue with this character is very, I don't want to say unimaginative, but I think nowadays, even if it was John Romita doing it, John Romita Jr., he would have thought of a more creative way to show the water, like maybe show him translucent or show, more of a gradual change from the water to the person. Whereas here it's just jeans, t-shirt, and then water,
Yeah, and it might be easier to do that today with having doing it digitally and having the layers and being able to mess with the transparency.
Right.
But
I guess they're limited back then.
Right. But I still do appreciate the fact that they kind of showed him transitioning from water to human, and having the gradient almost of you could see him coming up from the hose or jumping out of the washing machine. They still have that, which I thought was great.
Yeah. So yeah, one strange thing about this issue is there's this subplot where Peter Parker, we always got to touch base with Peter Parker's supporting cast. And there's a weird scene, not a weird scene, but I think a poorly written scene where he goes to talk to J. Jonah Jameson. And there's a ridiculous scene. I'm just trying to find it here. I just had it where is it here? It's on page, here it is. Digital 19 and the original 18.
Oh, okay.
Where he goes to talk to J. Jonah Jameson, and Peter's like, he goes, I do have a request from Spider-Man. He wants you to print a challenge from him to Hydro Man, demanding a showdown at high noon tomorrow atop the Caton building. He says that's the only way to force Hydro Man into the open. Then JJJ says, okay, I'll print it because it'll make a good story and maybe get the web-headed nuisance out of our collective hair permanently. I can't see J. Jonah Jameson agreeing that easily.
Right.
And it's so preposterous. Yeah,
it seems very rushed and forced. I don't think it's necessarily a bad plot point if they would have done it properly, I think, or if they would have, done a little bit. Maybe they could have had Peter realize he's not going to print it, so he kind of tricks JJ into
or tricks him, right.
Yeah, there's kind of a reverse psychology, too bad we couldn't do anything. Maybe this guy, maybe this crook can get rid of the Spider-Man, and he's like, that's a great idea. I'll print a story right now.
Right. So yeah, I think if this was Roger Stern, who's writing Spectacular at this time, I think he would have. We kind of talked about how in a Roger Stern story, when Spider-Man tries something, it doesn't always work the first time. There's always something that sort of trips him up, right? Or an obstacle. Mm-hmm. And it seems like here, Denny O'Neil's kind of just, it's like the plot is very convenient just because he wants to get through it,
Right.
So unfortunately, then you know what? I like fight scenes. They're not it's funny because I love superheroes, but fight scenes are not my favorite part about superhero comics, and they tend to take up too much space. And in this issue, it takes up quite a bit of space. But one thing I really liked, and I think you liked, was the way that Spider-Man sort of outsmarted him, right?
Oh, I loved it. I love when Peter Parker has to come up with a way to get over the villain's power. It's not just a punch for punch. He's got to figure out what the villain's strengths are and what its weaknesses are, so that way he can take that weakness and adapt and learn how to fight them that way. And what he does in this comic is he throws a bunch of newspapers and towels and clothes at Hydro Man, and they slowly start absorbing water, which takes away a lot of his mass for him to be able to actually fight him and make a difference in that fight, because beforehand he was just punching and it kind of didn't really do much. It was punching water.
Right.
So.
And then speaking of punches, now with a weakened Hydro Man, Spider-Man punches him, and as is usual in a Denny O'Neil Spider-Man story, it kind of is very quickly over after that. There's only 3 more panels.
Right.
It is a little bit rushed, but not as rushed.
I was going to say he is getting a little bit better, I think. It still feels rushed. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but it does feel at least a little bit better because there's a panel kind of explaining kind of like an epilogue type of thing where we see a panel with a shot of New York and it starts raining. It says at 4:15 that afternoon, a cool breeze sweeps in from the west and the sky darkens. Millions of New Yorkers raise their eyes and in a sigh of relief, the heat wave is ended and the soothing rain begins to fall. Soothing and very, very strange. So it's a kind of a nice like hint that he's going to come back, and it ends the story and ties up the line from earlier, how it's been extremely hot, and that's why Hydro Man was sweating so much and kind of turned to the puddle earlier on. So
sure,
it's a little bit better than his normal like rushed last panel being him defeating the villain, but.
Yeah, definitely better. And again, the prose is fine. It's a nice little wrap up. So I'll definitely give it extra points for that. Like overall, I think this is a fairly classic issue of Spider-Man. Like, I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10. Like I recommend it as a good, solid issue of Spidey. What do you think?
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. I think this is definitely my favorite issue of the month as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it's mine too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
So that brings us to Marvel Tales, Marvel Team Up.
Marvel Team Up, right.
Yeah, Marvel Team Up.
We've got Spider-Man and Nighthawk in issue 101.
Right. And do you want to introduce the creative team?
Sure. Let me just jump to the beginning. So we have J.M. DeMatteis, I believe.
Oh, by the way, I believe, you know what's funny? I've been corrected. I think it's, how did you pronounce it?
J.M. DeMatteis?
Yeah, I think you're right. No, I was going to correct you, but you're right. You're right. Okay. But anyway,
so he's the writer. We have Jerry Bingham as the artist, and Mike Esposito is the inker.
Right. And J.M. DeMatteis is most famous, at least to me, for doing the funny bwahaha version of Justice League International. He was the dialogue writer on that. Did you ever read that?
No, I haven't.
It's highly recommended, at least for the first 2 or 3 years.
Really?
There was there was nothing like it at the time. It started out as Justice League, then became Justice League International, then Justice League America, and it was drawn by Kevin Maguire, and then later drawn by Adam Hughes, and it was plotted by Keith Giffen and dialogued by J.M. DeMatteis, and it was, again, at the time, there was nothing like it. It started off serious, then became sort of a satire, almost like Ghostbusters level funny. And then as the years went by, it got really goofy, unfortunately, and over the top, and then it just burned out.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But anyway, still recommended. Good book. And he's also the writer of Kraven's Last Hunt. He also did Defenders.
Right. I was going to say, I think I most recognize him for Kraven, but yeah.
Also, Moonshadow from he was an early Vertigo writer.
Oh, right. I think I remember you saying that.
Or was maybe Moonshadow was Marvel. I can't remember at this point, but it doesn't matter. So anyway, this is kind of a weird issue. Now Nighthawk. I just want to talk about Nighthawk briefly. I believe you said you're not familiar with the Squadron Supreme, right?
No, I'm not. Yeah.
Okay, so for those that don't know, pardon me, Squadron Supreme is like Marvel's sort of homage to Justice League. Originally, I believe it was... Now, I know that people are going to cut me down if I get this wrong, because I haven't actually read this story, but I believe the Squadron Sinister was created first, and they were a parallel... They were a group of superheroes from a parallel dimension. No, that's wrong. People are going to kill me. I'm going to have to cut this part out. I believe Squadron Sinister was first, and I think they're from our dimension, but they were all evil. And then Squadron Supreme was from a different Earth, and they were homage to the Justice League. So each member corresponded to a DC superhero. So there was
that's really cool.
It's very cool. So Superman was Hyperion, Batman was Nighthawk, and then there was what were the rest? I can't remember. Aquaman was Amphibian, and on and on and on. And then basically they kind of just hung around on the fringes for like a couple decades, just like Quasar. And then eventually they got a miniseries, then they got a graphic novel, blah, blah, blah. And so anyway, I'm confused about their backstory because I know that there's 2 versions of Nighthawk, and the Earth S version or Earth Squadron version, it looks almost exactly like Batman. And then the Marvel 616 version looks like this. So the other Nighthawk is more... Again, blue and gray, and this one's more like kind of bird themed with different colors. Right. But anyway, so
and you know what? If you are like, if we do ever get anything wrong about comics history or anything like that, we would love to hear what you guys have to say about that, or correct us in the comments, or
give us some feedback. To be right. We would love to be actually'd by anyone listening out there, right?
Yeah, because I think we both have a love for comics, but I don't think either of us are necessarily experts. Well, you're probably more of an expert than I am, at least.
I think I'm only an expert on a certain period from about mid 80s to early 90s as far as
Right.
superheroes go. I know that era inside and out, but I mean, the thing is I mean, when I was growing up, if there was no way for me to read anything that came out before, I mean, obviously you can go dig through back issue bins, but if I wanted to read these old stories, how was I ever going to find them? How was I ever going to find
Right.
Avengers number 72 or whatever? Like around 87 is when they started with Marvel Masterworks, but those were $50 a pop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And trade paperbacks were not common. So it unfortunately, I kind of wish that, growing up, I wish I had access, like digital access to all these comics, because I would have ate these reprints up, But it's like, it's taken me so long to get to the point where I have access to them all now. And obviously I'm still excited about it, but I know that I would have been more excited when I was like 13 and 14 reading these old comics, But anyway, what are you going to do? Okay, so back to the story. So this is a weird issue. This is a weird issue.
It doesn't really feel like a Spider-Man comic, does it?
No, it feels like a Nighthawk kind of like it's basically like they wanted to wrap up a Nighthawk story and they just happened to have Spider-Man in it. That's what it feels like.
Right.
Yeah.
And I suppose that it is a Marvel team up, not a Spider-Man, but I mean he is the through line for all the Marvel team up issues. So I don't know. I was thinking about that after, like the last time we recorded, we were talking about how it doesn't necessarily feel like a Spider-Man comic. I guess, do they all have to, like, do all the Marvel team up ones have to feel like a Spider-Man comic? Maybe it is more interesting to kind of visit other characters and have Spider-Man kind of take us through their story.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think in this case, it doesn't work at all because the story that we're given is not very exciting. It's very melodramatic and goofy and corny, and like it doesn't flow or work for me.
No.
I mean, I find this one similar to the Howard the Duck one we listened to, or we read a few episodes ago, where it kind of felt like a Howard the Duck comic, but Spider-Man was there along for the ride. And I think that works if you're going to give us a good Howard the Duck comic and introduce us to that character and that character's style of writing and talking to us and how they narrate. But if it doesn't work and it's not a good story, I'm not going to be interested to continue on. And
I agree.
That was the case for Howard the Duck, and I think, again, it's the case for Nighthawk here because, the story was not super fun.
No, and it's a case of, I think it's that you have a good writer, you have a good artist, but it doesn't jive as a comic book. Like just this week, we actually this week on Flea Market Fantasy, we actually did a Spider-Man comic. It was
cool.
Amazing Spider-Man. I believe it was 111, and it was written by Jerry Conway and drawn by John Romita Sr., who is, the greatest Spider-Man artist ever.
I was going to say Spider-Man artist.
Yeah, absolutely, the definitive artist. Yeah. And there is an example of a comic where all the elements work. The writing, the pencils, the inks, the color, even the sound effects, right? It's like a perfect package. Everything works together. In this comic, you have components that are good. The writing's good. The art is good. Blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't fit together. And when you look at you look at a page, some of these pages, and it's just loaded with dialogue and captions and going to say page 7 or digital page 8, which is original page 7. My God, I look at this page, and I mean, unless it's Alan Moore, I look at a page like this, and I'm like, I don't even want to try. I don't even want to read this because I know there's not going to be a payoff. And then not only that, but you start out with this weird scene of these two people camping, this gigantic caption explaining not even explaining what's going on, but just introducing you to them, and then they're talking about something that's unrelated, and then two characters you never see again. It's just so much dialogue,
we have 13 big dialogue boxes in bubbles just on this one page.
Mm-hmm.
And we only have 6 or 7 panels. It's so overcrowded with words, and it's really relying on the writers to tell the story and not the art itself.
Right.
And I think that the key to really good comic art is to that should be what's telling the story and not necessarily the writers. The writers should be doing like good dialogue and coming up with good stories, but I think it's the artist's job to tell the story in a appealing way that you don't necessarily need the words to even be there to understand what's going on.
Totally.
And on this page, we get two characters that we've never seen before, we'll never see again, and don't have anything to do with the story. It really feels like a "Don't drink, kids" PSA, right? Just slapped kind of right in the middle, and it's not subtle. There's no comedy in it. We get these campers like just sitting out by a fire, and one is like drinking a lot, and one of them says something like, "Shouldn't you be putting down the wine?" And she looks up to the sky and sees Spider-Man and Nighthawk swing by, and she says, "You know what? On second thought, I think I'm gonna hit the hay for the night," and stops drinking. Like it just, I don't know. I think last time I said I think it would have been better if, again, it was shown and not told what was happening, where the kids are partying, they're drinking, they're like chugging, and as they're doing that, they're looking up at the sky. They see the character swing by. They stop. They look at the bottle, and they put it down and walk into the tent.
Right.
Like you don't have to have like so many like bubbles and so much dialogue to explain what's going on. We get it.
And that's the thing, is that the dialogue should only give you information that you couldn't possibly get from the art. Now, granted, what they're saying you obviously couldn't figure out by looking at the art, but the point is what does their dialogue add to the story? It adds nothing. It's just a way it's almost like a way to just fill space. It's kind of pointless.
Yeah.
Very pointless.
Yeah.
And the thing is it also comes down to, comic books are a specific art form. And, for example, with, let's just say TV, when you're writing for TV is all about, like, say, a sitcom. You know that you only have 22 minutes. You know that there's only maybe, an 11-minute segment. You know that it's all about timing, and, I'm sure that a script for a sitcom is refined a bunch of times. Well, with a comic book, you're limited by pages, right? You're limited by space. And so you can't just be a good writer. You have to be a good writer of comic books. You have to know how to use that page properly. And I think that's the problem here, is that these are talented people, but they're not using comics to their fullest extent.
Right.
And then we have the next page, which is my favorite page of the whole comic.
My goodness.
Digital page 9. What incarnation is happening here? Okay, so we have a demonstration, an anti-nuclear demonstration, okay?
Right.
But this is a weird scene where Spider-Man and Nighthawk are entering the fray way in the background. In the foreground, you want to talk about not quite using the medium properly.
Yeah.
We're focusing all of our attention on these 4 extras sort of at the front here, and I can't really figure out what's going on, because we have 2 guys on the left who kind of have these Letterman sweaters on, and they're both drinking beers, but one of them looks like he has a straw attached to the guy's crotch. I can't quite figure out what's going on there.
Yeah, I think it's a cigarette or something. Like it's...
But it doesn't...
It doesn't... Yeah.
Like, I'm zooming it. It kind of looks like one, but because of, like, it's sort of like a tangent line. It's, like, connected to the line on his pants.
And it exactly ends where the other guy's pants start. So it really looks like it's something coming out of his pants. And it looks so awkward and weird. The guy that's, like, drinking the beer has his pinky up. And the beer isn't even, like... He's got, like, the thumb facing his mouth, and he's not even, like... The beer's not even touching his mouth, and there's no liquid coming out. Like, it's just so weird. Then you've got the other 2 on the right. This guy with long hair is just kind of standing there with a, hand in his pocket.
And then the other guy's hand looks like it's touching that hand.
Right. And he's got like a joint or something in his hand too. And it's just so...
Yeah.
It's so weird. And I think the weirdest part about this is the fact that they drew these characters drinking and smoking and kind of like taking a break from the protest, when we later find out that they're not even humans. They're robots that are being controlled by Nighthawk's undead girlfriend.
Yeah.
Like, it's so... it's so out of place and like... weird. And this entire page is practically a splash page.
Yeah,
like
pointless.
this panel that we're talking about is over 2/3 of the page.
Mm-hmm.
And you have like a tiny little panel up at the top with Spider-Man and Nighthawk swinging through the city. And then, there's just this giant, panel with really so much going on, but at the same time, nothing.
Exactly.
It's so...
It's just, again, it's just poor planning. Like, you know, ideally, I would assume the artist would plan the whole story out and go, okay, I know I want pages 7, 15 and 22 to have double page splashes, but specifically because of story points. But this does not deserve a splash. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous. But anyway, so I honestly, this story, I just read it like this week. I barely remember what happened, but I think you do. So you feel free to fill the listeners in on what's going on here.
So at the beginning, we get a little bit of backstory of Nighthawk. How one day he was driving drunk with his girlfriend and they crash into a tree. Mm-hmm. And we find out that she passed away.
Yes.
And he's kind of held that guilt for a while. Mm-hmm. But we find out that the villain that's kind of been after Nighthawk and is controlling these robots is his girlfriend that apparently did not die. And her whole goal is to capture him and tie him to the same car that they crashed and crash it into another tree to kill Nighthawk.
Talk about a convoluted motivation and a convoluted story, eh?
And on top of that, at the end, she comes to her senses and confesses her love for Nighthawk, and he does the same, and they're together again at the end of the issue. But the only reason this happens is because Spider-Man says something like, "Come on, don't you remember that you love him?" And then she kind of just snaps out of it. There's really nothing that leads up to this changing her mind, or like this whole setup was like, pretty much one piece of dialogue. And she's just like, "Oh, you know what? You're right. I did love him."
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. There's not really a big climax. There's not really a big decision that's made. Right. It's kind of just, I did love him. You're right. And then the story's over.
Yeah.
Kind of a rushed ending. I mean, it's not, again, it's hard to pin down what's wrong with the story, but I think that we've sort of nailed it. It's trying a little bit too hard to be serious, but then it's hampered by frickin' robots that are doing. It's just none of the elements add up. It doesn't. It's not cohesive,
And to show you like how it's trying to take itself too seriously, there's on page 7 of the digital comic, original 6, we have at the bottom left-hand corner, we have Spider-Man bowing his head, reminding himself about Uncle Ben.
Yep.
And kind of relating that to the death of Nighthawk's girlfriend.
Yeah.
And then at the end, we have like a little cloud of Uncle Ben coming back again while Spider-Man's swinging away, looking down on them. On the last panel. Like, it's just...
I know. I really don't like when they... I mean, if you're going to exploit Uncle Ben's death, that's... do it better than this, right?
Right. And I think maybe it would have been a better payoff if the story was a little bit more serious and took itself seriously.
Right.
And if it was more of a heavy story, I think that bringing up Uncle Ben and kind of allowing this new character to learn through Peter Parker's past would be a good way to a good reason for these two characters to be teaming up in this issue, and it would be a great way to wrap up the whole story and connect it with Spider-Man, and like it would feel natural. But because the whole story feels disjointed and not really cohesive and goofy at parts, especially with like the protesters pulling out guitars with guns in them and like sharpened metal signs to slice away at Spider-Man, like it just doesn't fit well.
No. And you know what's crazy? I don't understand how we've already done this review and neither one of us noticed this, but did you know there's a backup story in this issue?
Yeah. I was just going to say that. We completely skipped that.
Did you read it?
For our last recording. I did.
Okay, I didn't read it yet, but feel free, because I mean it's written by Mike W. Barr, who I'm a big fan of because of his work on Brave and the Bold and some other stuff. So and it's drawn by Spider-Man's co-creator Steve Ditko. So
it's a little goofy, but it's
okay.
It's fine. So Nighthawk is flying around, and he says something like he shoots like missiles out of his wings, and I think he's just doing it to let out some steam on like an old abandoned building. Yeah. So he's angry, and he's like, you know what? I'm just going to fire at this building. I don't really care. This is a great way to let off steam. And by doing so, he collapses a bunch of rubble onto this crippled little girl. And he has to go down and hold up this falling piece before it falls on her. And it's like 3 or 4 pages of this girl trying to crawl away while he's holding up this piece of building. And the sun is coming out, so he's losing his powers, which is something I didn't know about. He only has his powers at night.
Okay, I didn't know that either. Oh, I guess maybe that's why it's called Nighthawk.
Right, but the previous story was during the day, so I also don't know, like how true that is.
I don't know either. Yeah,
yeah, it's so weird. Like the story we were just reading with Spider-Man, it's set during the day, but.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to read this and get back to you because I don't know. I didn't even read this story. I don't know how.
It's very like drawn out. Like there's literally 3 or 4 pages in a row where it's just him holding up the building, yelling at this poor girl to crawl away, and she's screaming that she can't because she's in too much pain. Right. Okay. Like it's not just much to it. Yeah. It's. And then at the end, she finally gets out of the way. He drops the building on himself, and he pops out of it. He's like, I'm fine. My wings protected me. But they wouldn't have been able to protect both of us if the building fell. And then he flies away.
Well, I'm still going to read it. Yeah. I like Mike W. Barr and Steve Ditko, but I don't know if I'll enjoy it. But whatever, we'll see. So, that issue, not essential reading.
No.
Can't really recommend it. Probably will never read it again.
No.
But that brings us to Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 50.
Right.
The big anniversary issue, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about this one. So yeah, Roger Stern, John Romita Jr. again doing 2 comics in 1 month, which is unheard of today.
Right.
And inked by Jim Mooney again. This is another weird one.
So we did talk about last time the reason why there might have been double duty was because it feels like we get like half of last issue story and then the first half of a second story, and that's probably due to the back issue.
Well, yeah, the backup story, yeah, because there's a backup story featuring White Tiger, and my theory is that they either were late with number 49 and just dumped the White Tiger story into fill pages, or maybe they just needed to do something with White Tiger, so they threw it into that issue and then just cut out the last few pages of Spectacular and just pushed them to the next issue. But either way, it just makes for a very awkward issue, especially because it's number 50. Yeah, and it should be sort of like a landmark
an event
issue,
kind of thing. Yeah,
right. But no, it's just filler.
No, and again, like it really feels like the last half of a story and then followed up by the first half of a new story.
Totally.
Like they don't have anything to do with each other. About halfway through this issue or this story, we get another completely different storyline, and you can almost see exactly where the first story ends and the next one begins. And because we have a back story, or not a backstory, the back issue. What is it called?
Backup. It's called a backup story. Yeah,
backup story.
Yeah, yeah.
So this one comic is divided into thirds. Really, it feels like, and neither of those 3 parts feel compelling in any way, and don't connect. And this one was rough. A little rough.
Yeah, because we wrap up the Smuggler story. The cliffhanger last month was, I can't put Smuggler down, but I can't keep fighting him. So what am I going to do? And it was a very weak cliffhanger. This month picks up and basically throws that out the window.
Yeah, it just drops the problems of last issue.
Right.
Like, oh.
So a week ending to that. Then we go into the second storyline where Spidey ends up going out on a date with Deborah Whitman and then his Aunt May and her fiance Nathan Lubinsky.
Right.
And it's like nice to kind of touch base with them again. And then it goes into another flashback to Uncle Ben. Okay, fine, I can forgive it, right?
Right.
Sort of a recap of his origin, which is interesting to see because it's always interesting to see different artists draw that classic story, right? Because you can kind of compare it.
That's true, yeah.
This art, however, doesn't look great. It's not the best art from these two people, right? And
also at the same time, like, I can see this so many times. Like,
I know.
It's like Batman's parents' death too. Like, how many times am I going to see the pearls drop to the ground?
I know. It gets annoying. And the thing is that as time goes on, it's better to sort of just allude to it or hint at it. But in this recap of Spider-Man's origin, it's almost panel for panel.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not. Yeah, it is kind of annoying. So yeah, another kind of weak part to this issue. Then we get to the next sort of part of the story where Spider-Man ends up fighting a bunch of guys that look like aliens, which is the image they used for the cover to hook you in. But I always thought the cover's not my favorite.
Very weak. Yeah,
weak cover, kind of a throwback to the 50s.
It's also just like kind of plain with the like all white background,
right?
And then
what ends up happening is we find out these aren't actually aliens, right? It's all just. Is it an illusion? Is the whole thing an illusion?
I assume so. So the aliens end up taking Peter Parker away. They originally went to abduct Aunt May because she has information that they needed. But Peter Parker steps up and says he has the same information. Don't take her, take me instead. So they take Peter Parker into the spaceship and they abduct him. And it turns out that it was actually Mysterio.
Right.
So it could be an illusion. Or it could be maybe Mysterio's goons.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. The thing is, too, they put him in a spaceship and he does actually fly away. So it's not like the spaceship is an illusion either.
Good point. Yeah.
So
I guess we'll find out next. Yeah, we'll find out next issue how much of this is an illusion. Not a great issue. Like, basically, I think Roger Stern's first storyline was really good with Belladonna. This is not a great follow-up. Obviously, we know, or I know because I've read it, but it does get better as it goes along, like this era. But this is certainly not a good chapter in his run.
Yeah, not super great.
No. And then we have a follow-up. We have a backup story that I, again, did not read, but you did read. So do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So this one, we really just pick up where we left off from last week's backstory and a backup story. And it's White Tiger getting a little bit of information from this police officer in the alleyway. And he finds out that the people that murdered his family, they've got a couple of places where they might be hiding out. He goes to the first one and he like starts beating up the person that's in there, like scaring and threatening the person that's in there. And it turns out to just be a homeless dude. So then he's like, oh no, like I shouldn't have done that. So then the next place he goes to, he's a little bit more cautious and doesn't jump right into fighting. And because of that, he ends up getting overtaken by Gideon Mace and his goons. And that's really where the story ends, is him getting kind of tackled to the ground. So again, not a whole lot happens. I don't think it was bad, but it also wasn't very eventful.
And the fact that we never really saw White Tiger ever again. Maybe we did, but we certainly don't remember it. But he obviously didn't amount to much after this, right? So
yeah, and I'm curious to see if this is just filler or if they are building up to having him team up with Spider-Man. Because I think I think that if that is what they're building up to, I think it could be a fun kind of introduction to slowly introduce his backstory and see what he's going up to throughout the issues at the same time we're reading Spider-Man. And then that way, when you do see him team up, you don't really have to go through everything about him. You could just kind of throw him in with Spider-Man and focus on that story rather than focusing on who this character is. But if they don't do that, I think it's kind of a waste of potential. Like, I don't know. We'll see.
Unfortunately, at this point, at least in this last month or two, Spectacular definitely seems like the B Spider-Man series. However, because Roger Stern eventually gets awarded Amazing, I mean, it's obviously because at some point they realized he was the better writer. He was doing a better job than Denny O'Neil. And so I have read some of those issues, and they're great. So that is coming our way. For now, it's not definitely not a good issue. I don't really recommend it. Maybe give it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, if that.
Yeah, if that, right. 4 to 10 maybe. It's just not a good issue. It's a mess. Right?
And I think again it has to do with just kind of the two different stories in one, and it doesn't neither the first half of the Spider-Man story or the second half of the Spider-Man story really go with each other, and we just kind of get a glimpses of what's to come. So not super great.
Nope. No. So, unfortunately, that's it for this week. We that's it for January 1981. Next week, we'll be covering February 1981, covering Amazing Spider-Man 213, Marvel Team Up 102, and Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man number 51.
Right. And you can catch us over at Comic Syndicate on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you and see what you think about the episode. You can also find us on Facebook at the Comic Book Syndicate. Let us know what you think about the issues that we read and what you think of the next issues for next week's episode. And we also want to know what you guys think about the podcast. We want to hear some feedback and, keep the conversation going. So, find us there.
All right, so we will see you again next Monday on Here Comes the Spider-Cast.